Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to a brand new video. My name is Arfat, and in today's video, I'd like to discuss the unique monotheism of Islam. Now, I'm gonna title this video that way, the unique monotheism of Islam, and for various reasons. Why? First things first, Islam is the only religion that actually profess monotheism in its actual in its, I would say, in the deepest sense of the word. And the closest to that is actually Judaism, as I've mentioned in my previous video. However, Judaism, the creed, the Shema, doesn't actually negate the existence of other gods. It's just that Jews have to worship the God of Israel. Okay? However, Islam, the Islamic monotheism, is that you cannot accept other gods, and that you only have to worship and accept and profess that there's only one God, and that there's no other deities except this God. Okay? The word Allah basically means the God, okay, with a definite article. And the first part of the Shahadatain is the negation of the existence of other gods or God. And the second part of the first part of the Shahada is to worship only one God, or to acknowledge that there's only one God. In English, there's no God except the God. And then the second part of the Shahada is to profess that the Prophet Muhammad SAW is the last and final messenger. Okay? Also, one thing to take note here is that while Muslims profess that the Prophet Muhammad SAW, may peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, while Muslims profess that the Prophet Muhammad is the last and final messenger, remember, we do not negate the existence of the other prophets and messengers, because we do not say that there is no messenger besides Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, as the first part of the Shahada. So the first part of the Shahada is negating the existence of other God and to only accept the God. And the second part is to accept that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last and final messenger. And so we do not negate the existence of the other prophets. Now, according to the Hadith, over 120,000 prophets were sent. Prophets and messengers were sent. The difference between prophet and messenger is that, as the scholars have explained, the prophet are those who do not receive new law or new revelation. Okay? For example, John the Baptist, he wasn't a messenger, but he was a prophet, because he wasn't given new revelation. This is according to Islamic theology. Whereas the Prophet Isa, Jesus, in English, he was given the Injil, or we translate as the Gospel, the Good News, Evangelion. And so he was a messenger, and he was also a prophet. So a messenger is also a prophet, but a prophet is not a messenger, not necessarily so. As I've also mentioned in my previous video, that there are also holy men, pious men, like the family of Imran, for example. Okay, whoever this Imran was, there are three different opinions, but he could be a pious person, so on and so forth, but he wasn't a prophet. Same for Dhul Qarnayn, or we don't call it Alexander the Great, but a lot of historians, Western historians, like to equate Dhul Qarnayn with Alexander the Great. But we reject this because, as I've mentioned in my previous video, Alexander the Great was a pagan, if we believe Arians and Plutarch's account. But either way, Muslims reject the existence of other deities, even deities, not necessarily God, but deities. For example, the concept that we found in Hinduism, Muslims outrightly reject. Jews reject as well. Okay? The concept that we found in paganism, for example, okay, Muslims reject. Muslims also reject that there can be lesser divine figures, like we found in the Hellenistic world, the Greco-Roman world, as well as we found in classical Greece, so on and so forth, quote unquote. And so Muslims reject this. And so the Shahadatain, the Muslim creedal, or the Muslim creed, is the negation of the existence of other gods besides the God. And we only worship the God, the one who created, as the Quran explained, the one who created the heavens and the earth and whatsoever in between, the one who turned day into night, night into day, so on and so forth, the one who fashioned the constellation with stars, so on and so forth. And so this is the God that Muslims worship. In Greek, in the New Testament, this is called the Father, okay, as John 17:3 mentioned, okay. And also in other various places in John, no one can come through God, no one can come through the Father except through me, because Jesus, he was a messenger to the Bani Israel, okay, the Bani Israel, the people that was sent, the people that Jesus was sent to. And in the New Testament, in the Gospel of John, as well as the Synoptic Gospel, you found that the authors of the Gospel, they were lambasting. They will keep on saying the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Okay, and the Quran mentions this as well. The Quran mentions that Jesus was sent to the Bani Israel, okay, the people of Moses, okay, the children of Israel, the tribe of Israel. And so Jesus wasn't sent to the Christians. And how did Christianity came to be? This is a huge topic in itself. But to summarize, the early Christians, they were followers of Jesus, and they were Jews. And scholars called them Jewish Christians or Jewish Christianity. As far as our sources goes, these Jewish Christians, they believe in only one God. They were worshipping the Father, which is Ha-Theos. In Greek, in Islam, in Arabic, it basically means Allah, the God. And so the followers of Jesus, they were worshipping God with a capital G. They were not worshipping Jesus, so on and so forth. And it was much later on, as I've mentioned in my previous video, whereby people started adopting the Pauline ideology, and so they became Pauline Christianity. And then Pauline Christianity took a development on its own, and it became Trinitarianism. Okay. And so the early Christians, if we read the texts that are found in the New Testament carefully, we can clearly say distinctly, there are passages that support this as well, that we can actually infer with certainty that Jesus was a monotheist. And the monotheist of Jesus was pretty much close to the monotheist of the Muslims today. And so, what about the early Jews? Now, the people of Moses, as we can see from the Pentateuch, the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we can also pretty much infer that they were monotheists. But we are not so certain as to what kind of monotheists they were. Were they henotheists? They were definitely not pantheists. But from the Shema itself, if we look at the Shema, the strong point, which is the Shema, is that they do not negate the existence of the other gods. And if we turn to the Quran, why is the Quran so critical of the Jews, especially in Surah Al-Baqarah, whereby the children of Israel was mentioned many times in Surah Al-Baqarah. And also in Surah Al-Baqarah we found that the Jews and Christians, they dispute, even though they were reading the same book, which is the Bible. And so if we draw materials from the Quran, we found that there were early Jews as well who claimed that Uzair. Now this figure is, we don't know really for certain. Some people say this is the priest or the scribes Ezra, Uzair. But some people take the early Jews, they believe that Uzair is actually the Son of God. And the Christians believe also that Jesus is the Son of God, even till today. And so, if we draw materials from the Quran, we found that the concept of equating sonship to God, theos, is actually not a Christian invention. And this is actually true as well if we look at the Greco-Roman philosophy. Not philosophy, but the Greco-Roman world. We found that Zeus became a divine entity, okay, and he was given these powers and so forth. Sophia, Yalbadoa, and so we found all this, the Hellenistic concept, even way before, whereby God actually has a family, and then the family, God has a son, so on and so forth, and then the son went rogue. So this is all Greek mythology, and so this is the to say that Jesus is actually the Son of God is actually not unique to Christianity. The concept itself, sonship towards God. This is also found in the Greco-Roman philosophy as well as before. And so when the Quran mentioned that they have equated, they have claimed that God had a son, okay, we can also open this up and say that this is actually not a rebuttal or a refutation towards the Christians as well as the Jews, but also towards the concept of that are found in the Greco-Roman world. Today, there are still people who believe that God had a son and that there are lesser divine entities, so on and so forth. And this we found in other paganistic religion, whereby God had chosen somebody and then they became the intermediaries and so on and so forth. And so this concept is still found today. And so the Quran, we can open it up. Not only is the Quran negating or refuting the Jews and the Christians, but also the pagans and those who profess that God had a son. Now, the word son here, we can also open it up and say that this is not physical son, even metaphorical son is actually impermissible because the terms have been abused. And so the scholars of Islam, they want the Muslims to be very careful. They do not want to entertain even a metaphorical sonship towards God. And so it is prohibited for Muslims to say that God had a metaphorical son even. Okay? Because this concept is foreign. This concept is actually detested. It is grotesque actually in Islam. It is impermissible. Because of the severity, especially in Surah Al-Maryam, okay, whereby the mountains almost collapse, okay, because they claim that God had a son. And so because of the severity of this issue and the huge refutation that are found in the Quran by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so it is impermissible even to say that God had a son metaphorically, because even this concept of metaphorical son is actually something that is unfathomable because of the uniqueness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot even entertain the idea, even if it's metaphorical or philosophical, that God actually had a son. And so the Islamic creed, the creed of unique monotheism, is also a negation of all the other creeds that claim or profess that there's another deity, even if this deity is of a lesser status or power, right? And the Quran mentions this as well. If there's another God, okay, not only the Quran mentions this, Imam al-Ghazali mentioned this as well. If there's another God, definitely this universe will never be created. Okay, because this God will need to consult this God, and then they will be unhappy, so on and so forth. Okay, you can read his work. But also Arius refutes this as well. That the Arius is clear in his writings or whatever survive. He mentions that there is only one ungenerated, okay, and that is God, Theos. Now, I should take this time before I end the video to share with you a little bit about the Christian interpretation of monotheism. The Christian interpret that the Trinity is also monotheistic, and this I completely disagree because mathematically this is actually incorrect, and philosophically this is also incorrect. Let's look at things from a mathematical perspective. If we say that the Trinity is actually monotheism, then we have clearly not understood what monotheism really is. Monotheism is actually there's only one God. This God doesn't have a person, doesn't have a being, so on and so forth. There's only one. And one is not equal to three, and three is not equal to one. No matter how much you try to fudge with the numbers, try to give explanations, so on and so forth. One is one, three is three, and one cannot equal three. Yeah. From a philosophical perspective, it doesn't make sense even to entertain the idea that God is three persons and one being. This is something that is unfathomable. Okay? To say that the Son, the Spirit, and the Father, these three are one, they're distinct, okay? But also they're not distinct. They're not three persons, but they're three different persons, because the Son is not the Father is not the Son, and the Spirit is not the Son nor the Father. And so this kind of philosophy is also very difficult to fathom. In fact, it doesn't make sense. And so the Muslims are highly critical of the Trinity. That doesn't mean that we disrespect the religion of Christianity. People have the right to believe what they want to believe. Lakum dinukum waliyadin. The Quran is very clear in this. You believe what you believe. But we will never believe what you believe. Okay? And so Muslims outrightly reject the Trinitarian creed, because monotheism has nothing to do with Trinitarianism. Trinitarianism is actually a thing in itself, and monotheism is at the other end of the spectrum. And so I would group Trinitarianism with all the other kinds of paganistic religion. Now I'm using the word pagan here not as a form of disrespect. Scholars uses the word pagan as well. Yeah. And so no disrespect to all the religions out there. And so Trinitarianism is in the same group as paganism. And then monotheism is on the other end of the spectrum. And so Trinitarianism is not actually monotheism, no matter how much the Trinitarians have tried to actually fudge around with the vocabulary, so on and so forth. Mathematically, philosophically, we can't entertain this concept that monotheism and Trinitarianism, they're actually the same thing. They're not. And let's call a spade a spade. Either way, I hope this video entertains you and provides something for you to think about. And so with that being said, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.